Hello and welcome everyone. This is Taco Movie Talks. I'm here with Matt. Matt, this week we watched John Cassavetes, a very famous actor, screenwriter, director, and we covered Clint Eastwood, who is also maybe, a little bit more well known as an actor. But Cassavetes, I think, as far as critical acclaim, is someone that countless directors and critics really look to as a great, all time great director. Um, and there's a big difference that I noticed, especially between Clint Eastwood and the films I've seen with Cassavetes. It wasn't a piece that he wrote to really shine a light upon himself and his abilities. It's generally other actors that get terrific roles in his films that really shine.
Yeah, that's right. And what he's known for, I think, is being possibly the best actors director or someone who can direct actors extremely well. I think because he was an actor himself, and I've heard a lot of interesting stories about things he did on set to get people to act certain ways.
I would love to hear some of those stories, but the like you said, he brings out great performances in all the movies I've seen. And I saw Faces, Shadows, opening night, and then the two movies we're gonna talk about, which is Woman Under the Influence and Killing of a Chinese Bookie, and in damn near every single one of those films, there was at least one great performance.
Yeah, I mean, Gina Rollins in A Woman Under the Influence is obvious, and oh, the other actor's name, Cosmo. I forget his name, Ben Garza, but
Yes,
he
yes.
is also incredible. And yeah, they're some of my favorite, I think, performances of any movie. Maybe like my favorite ones of all time.
Yeah, I have to say, Gina Roland was so good. I mean, just amazingly good. Close to, like, literally, just in this stretch of movies I watched, was someone I was like, I think she might be one of the greatest actresses I've ever seen. And I was not, it wasn't a name that was like in my memory bank. Is she, or does she have really kind of performances that pop into your mind outside of Cassavetes, or did she really make her name working with Cassavetes?
You know, I think she's probably been in a few movies. I'm usually not the best with actor or actresses' names, but I bet if I went back and watched them, I would recognize her immediately now because I totally only really know her from Cassavetes films. And yeah, I think she was actually married to John Cassavetes at one point. So that probably played a lot of had a lot of influence in how she acted for his movies in particular.
I was gonna actually throw that question to you, and I'm glad you kind of got ahead of it. And I heard, or I guess I just saw maybe like tabloid headlines whenever you kind of look into Cassavetes. One being their relationship, which I wasn't sure if they were all the way married or just seeing each other, what have you. But it seems as though, a lot of perhaps their relationship turmoil made for really great source material for Cassavetes, or maybe he's just able to kind of capture this raw emotion for the settings or the premises that he comes up with, because he's terrific at it. These films capture so much emotion, and that is ultimately what drives the movie and makes it so damn good.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he actually, I think, died on at like age in his late 50s because he was an alcoholic. So I'm in my mind, I think the relationship turmoil probably played a big role in the film. And I think you see, like you've probably seen now since you've seen all these movies of his that he kind of has themes that he likes to, make movies about, and especially in this other movie called Husbands too, which I would recommend. Um, he likes like male, like aggressive male characters are really prevalent, and so is like bad relationships
Mm.
and like it feels like when you're watching his movies, like you're hanging out with a bunch of like New Yorkers who like don't have a filter. It's very interesting. It's kind of they kind of all have that same feeling to them.
Mm. Yeah, and his male character. Well, something that I actually it kind of just evoked memories from watching, but there was like a lot of alcohol consumption in his films, and
Yeah,
I'm kind of, and it's well, I shouldn't laugh because he ended up perishing from that, but it is something that makes a lot of sense in retrospect.
yeah, and an interesting thing about A Woman Under the Influence, at least, was you kind of never knew if she was a drunk or if that contributed to her problem.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, so it really does like pop up in all of his movies. And I think, I don't know if I'm sure about this, but I remember I think seeing a video where he was talking about how he would kind of film like when they didn't know, or he would do something to get people upset and angry, and then he would start filming. And I think, you can really tell because I didn't, or I remembered how much yelling there is in all of his films when I was watching them.
Oh, absolutely. Um, and it, you touched on opening night, I believe, and how there's kind of it's very ambiguous as to whether Gina Roland's character is an alcoholic or not, and I think it maybe shows, especially because Cassavetes wrote the script, maybe an unhealthy depiction and relationship with alcohol because in in a sense he almost romanticizes it as an artistic something that was able to elevate Gina Roland's character's ability to artistically express herself, and it might not be a stretch to think that's how subconsciously or consciously he looked at it as well.
Yeah, that's I think one of like the central theme or one of them in opening night. And in A Woman Under the Influence, it's kind of like a more like I maybe only noticed it because I watched it the second time, but the mom is asking at one point if she had been drinking, and then she also downs that like giant glass of whiskey at the very beginning of the movie. So it's just, and then in Killing of a Chinese Bookie, he runs like that weird strip tease show where everyone's drinking and he's drinking all the time too. So the characters are always in like these situations where uh, you know drinking alcohol is very common and popular among all the characters usually.
Now, Matt, you kind of you touched upon the fact that Cassavetes is a big fan of having themes that run throughout maybe multiple films of his, and honestly, and I told you this prior to us starting recording, but I was really interested to discuss Killing of a Chinese Bookie and A Women Under the Influence because these seem to be the most nuanced and deepest. But one that I was able to kind of pick up on that I think was prevalent in, I think it's Faces and in Opening Night was a recapturing of youth, and that seemed to be very important to the central characters of both movies. And I wanted to kind of get your perspective if you saw it that way in those two movies as well, and what you thought about that as one of Cassavetes' themes.
Yeah, I agree that that is probably his number one theme because one thing I was thinking of Killing of a Chinese Bookie was how Cosmo was. so like out of his league, and he was like in his late 40s, and he seemed like he should be like in his 20s or 30s doing this. But in terms of like faces, the I think the central theme of that movie is definitely recapturing youth. Like when I would describe it to people, I would say adults who are, already have kids, and maybe their kids have even gone to college and they want to live like they're, in college again, or they just graduated college. So it's, I wonder how that, I wonder if Cassavetes was like wild when he was younger, and now he's kind of trying to recapture that himself.
Mm, absolutely. Yeah, I feel like that could easily be something that inspired him. And just a quick spoiler alert. Just I'll say it very quickly, but one of the things I really enjoyed about Faces was the husband was kind of looking to capture something, and well, he kind of seemed very serious about having this affair, and it ended up just being like a quick, okay, I just needed one night with this younger lady, and it got him to where he realized that he ultimately needed the maturity of the relationship he had with his wife, and the emotional turmoil of him basically coming clean before he did it set his wife on a path to where she had pretty much the opposite realization, in that he wasn't a caring person, her husband, and she found that in a younger man. And I really, really loved that script, and the whole telling of that story I found like just it was a masterpiece, honestly. And I think that goes for the majority. His debut was, it didn't push the bounds as far as his other movies, but I enjoyed all of his movies, and I thought they were all great and really pushed their themes pretty far.
Yeah, Faces is probably what I'd consider. Like I had when I was trying to rank one of the Woman of the Influence or Faces, I had trouble choosing. That's also my favorite one. I guess besides, it's so hard to rank them. I love most of his movies, but yeah, that script is crazy, and I think one of the most interesting things about that movie for me is that you see that dynamic in real life all the time. So it's just, even if you haven't gone through it, it's very easy to relate to it or be like, oh yeah, this happens a lot.
Yeah, and I kind of I want to ask you, Matt, was I guess how did you find Cassavetes? Was he maybe an inspiration for another director you were familiar with? Had you kind of talked to other people who were into movies, like basically how you exposed me to Cassavetes, and you kept recommending him? And I'm really glad that I watched his stuff, and watched a handful of his movies, because he was so great. But how did you find him?
Yeah, I thought you were going to ask me that, and I was actually thinking earlier this week how I found him, and I can't remember exactly, but if I had to guess, because I found a lot of directors this way, because my entry into movies, I know I've talked about this before, but I loved Harmony Korine's movies, and I think there was a big list somewhere of like films that he liked, and also he had mentioned Cassavetes a bunch in interviews, and and then when I started researching him, he seemed pretty important. And I think the first movie I watched from him was A Woman Under the Influence. And I think after that, I just went on a roll watching a bunch of them.
Mm. Harmony Korine, he's such an interesting character in cinema, and I really badly want to watch Kids. I'm waiting to watch that, and then Gummo is another one, which is quite a, from what I've heard at least, it's a disturbing movie without having a lot of the trademarks of typically disturbing movies. Is I guess from your viewing of Harmony Korine's filmography and the films that he's written on, do you see maybe some influence that he was able to inject into his films that you think he got from Cassavetes?
Oh yeah, for sure. Just like the way the movies are filmed. Like when I first started watching uh Killing of a Chinese Bookie, I was immediately like, okay, here's his distinctive style, like with the camera movement, the extreme close-up shots. And that kind of like freedom, I guess, to move the camera around and also that I want to say like 15 millimeter or 8 millimeter, like the kind of grainier film look is another type of uh, thing, I guess. And also, like Cassavetes inspired people to make films that had a lot of meaning on lower budgets because he shot, I think, a lot of these movies with his own money that he made from acting. So that whole, his whole outlook on movie making is extremely inspirational for a lot of filmmakers.
Yeah, and one that kind of comes to mind, and I don't know for certain, but I think there's clearly a comparison that can be made, is a Paul Thomas Anderson. And the reason I say that is because PTA seems to be very, very skilled at doing character studies, and perhaps the best at that from my exposure. I think an argument can be made that Cassavetes is the man when it comes to character studies. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree that he probably has my favorite movies about characters because that's all that it ends up really being about. Like the I noticed the plot is there. Well, in Killing of a Chinese Bookie, there's kind of the noir plot going on, but it's really not about that. Even though in a way that it involves that a huge amount. But but yeah, for Paul Thomas Anderson, like I that movie Magnolia is one of my favorites. And so is Boogie Nights. I love both those a lot. And those are incredible character studies, but they're a little the difference I think is that he likes to do an ensemble cast. Like he likes to you get to see a lot of characters instead of focusing on usually one.
Yeah, and a lot of his movies have room for multiple actors and actresses to shine through. Opening night, I feel like Cassavetes actually he has a very good performance, especially the ending was a really strong performance by him, and of course Gina Rollins is tremendous. Gina Rollins and Peter Falk in A Woman Under the Influence. Faces, I feel like you have a great performance by Gina Rollins and the male lead whose name eludes me. His scripts are just there's so much room and there's so much depth for the characters to just really let it all hang out and put on a tremendous performance. And we've seen directors who have definitely been inspired by this, but man, I can see what all the hype is about. I guess.
Yeah, yeah, and another director, like the Safdie brothers, if you've seen Uncut Gems, or any of
Exactly.
those movies, they're like to me, they're the most. They're like the Cassavetes of our era. It's kind of more like focused on like they take from other directors too, um, but the way it's filmed, especially, is and the way the script is, where the characters kind of it's not improvising, but they're kind of I think they're more given this is what your character is feeling like what would you do in this situation kind of acting direction instead of like memorize the lines and say them like in this way.
And I recently watched a really interesting video about the Safdie brothers. They I don't know if it was their first feature length film or if it was maybe one of their shorts before they started feature length films, but they had a movie about a drug addict, and they used actual people, a lot along the lines of how Kids was kind of filmed with New York skateboarder kids during the 90s. This film used an actual, former drug addict to play a heroin addict in a film. And they made kind of, when they started their feature length films, this big jump towards, well, we want to kind of reverse engineer what we were able to do previously and write the script around the way this, very famous actor would be if they were kind of this street tough kid, the way that Robert Pattinson was in Good Times, and also like how would Adam Sandler be had his life gone in this kind of trajectory, and he was working in the Diamond District of New York City. One question I wanted to throw to you, Matt, was I think you might have been the first person to draw a comparison that I heard between Killing of a Chinese Bookie and Good Times. Am I correct in that you kind of saw that? And maybe if you didn't say it, is there a comparison to be made? I think I see some comparisons there.
It's funny because I'm not sure if I said that, but I thought about that when I was rewatching it. I was thinking uh, how it's similar because it's kind of like the same sort of noir character study movie, but like the Safdie brothers kind of put their own their own style and spin on it. Um, so yeah, and like a comparison I just thought of right now in my head is how both characters in both movies, they kind of are searching or going for something, but you don't really know what it is. Like in Good Time, it's more like he's just he has the goal of getting his brother, but it's just like it keeps on going and spiraling in different directions. And it's kind of the same way with Killing a Chinese Bookie. He's going along with it, and he just keeps going along with it, and you have no idea what's going to happen. It's funny.
I agree. It's a search for both the characters, and I think it's way more complex than what I'm gonna boil it down to. But I think you might even agree with me that it seems like Robert Pattinson in Good Times is maybe looking for redemption, just because his character maybe for his whole life had been objectively a bad person, and by helping his brother he can kind of redeem himself in that he's not a bad person. It's just bad circumstances led him to making bad decisions in the past. Whereas Chinese Bookie, at least the way I was reading it, it almost felt like that Cosmo was almost trying to find an inner strength that he had lost. Does that kind of ring true to you, or did you see it differently?
Yeah, like the way you said about Cosmo, I agree with that. For uh, Good Time, I hadn't really thought about it like that, but also I never really thought of Good Time that much like an analytical, just because when you're watching it, it like took me. It's one of those movies that's like uh, kind of like riding a roller coaster, like it's
Mm.
crazy, and it. But thinking about it, yeah, it seems like in Good Time, Robert Pattinson's character, he's like confused to me. But also he acts like he knows what he's doing, but he's just someone that lives extremely impulsively. And I'm not sure, it seems like he does care about his brother, especially from the beginning. But just from the way the movie is, I'm not sure if it's just something he wanted and couldn't get, so he's going to keep trying, and he's one of those types of people, or if he
Mm.
actually cared about his brother. For Cosmo, yeah, I agree about or I agree with what you said, and also I feel like he has all that gambling debt, and he just seems just way like he's being taken advantage of all the time by the mobsters, but his only happiness seems to be his club and those girls. Even though he doesn't really have like relationships with them, he feels like he does.
That is a lot of what you said kind of goes into what makes the movie so it was very complex and it was really deep. There was a lot of deep seated meaning behind everything, and I'm really happy we're getting to dig into it. And basically, I feel like summarized the plot pretty dang good because the whole basis of it is Cosmo is a club owner. He, I guess, has gone to this kind of gambling casino type mob casino and incurs a tremendous debt and has to commit a crime in order to pay back the debt because he doesn't actually have the liquidity to pay it back in cash. But it's such a juxtaposition, and I think you were kind of alluding to it, that he gets taken advantage of, and he sees himself as a certain way, but the way he's treated by the people around him kind of speaks to the contrary. But when he has this mission in front of him, you get to see his full capabilities, and it's actually impressive what he is able to do, and the way he's painted, that is what makes the movie so compelling because you don't expect him to succeed at all.
Yeah, I know. That's something I was thinking about too. It's funny because I didn't even remember what happened at the end from the first time I saw it. So I was still like, I was not knowing, if he's gonna make it out or not. And then, you do not expect him to to uh to I guess do not I don't want to spoil anything, but do everything he does. And still be able to hold down his little club that he loves so much, because that's the only reason he would pay it back, was because he wanted to keep his shows going.
Exactly, and that's what further kind of pins him into a corner. Is that seems to, I don't know. Do you think that is his identity, or is it just something that is maybe the only thing less that brings him, or the only thing left that brings him joy, or option three, is it the that people kind of have to be around him and treat him with some respect because he's their boss? What do you kind of think, to play armchair psychologist? What do you think motivates him to have this love for the club, I guess?
I think it's kind of a combination of all the ones you said, but if I had to choose his, I think, biggest motivation, it seems to me that that's kind of the only thing he has left that makes him happy. And you don't know, but he probably has had the club for a long time, and there's probably been a lot of those girls that have come through, and I think that seems to be the thing he likes the most, is having those relationships. And also, I guess he might just feel like he's a successful businessman. That might be important to him.
Mm.
But it's kind of like he doesn't seem to have much of a personal life, at least in the movie, outside of the club, outside of his club, and the people in it. He tries to hang out with them in his personal time. So that's kind of like his life. So, it's like if he got rid of that, what would he have to do left? He would probably go back and, I guess, gamble more or something. He seems like a kind of a broken person.
I completely agree in the that fragmented nature, as to what makes him him, is what makes him just really interesting to observe and see what choices he's going to make. And it kind of brings further questions to the forefront. And one thing I was kind of thinking is, does is it a gambling addiction that is just a part of who he is, or does it kind of further go into his wanting to impress the people that he works with? Because he made a big point of bringing two of his employees, maybe multiple. I think it was at least two girls who worked at the club with him to gamble, and it turns out like he has a just tremendous amount of debt there. Do you think that was like it's a status thing for him as to why he goes there, or do you think maybe it's both that and an actual addiction?
I think it is both, but I think the status thing is definitely true because I think of what he wears and how he kind of acts like he's like suave, but he's really just kind of sleazy. And like it seems appearance is obviously like the most important thing for him, but he also seems like he has obviously like addictive tendencies. So gambling is probably just one of his vices, along with the he obviously drinks a lot because of where he works, and so that's something else he likes to do. So I think it's that's just kind of his personality, like uh, and it's a when you think of someone who owns a club like that, they're not they're going to be just like Cosmo, but they'll probably have some similar personality traits.
Yeah, and pretty much the it highlights kind of the personality of like a very on the fringe of, well, I don't know if fringe of society, that might be a bit of an overstatement, but it's a very unique profession for sure. And there's an entertainer who works for him who is a very unique character. Cosmo himself is definitely very much unlike a lot of characters in film or in real life. And you get the sense that he is deeply committed to this, and we just because of how the plot goes, but it also starts out where it seems like he has been paying another one of these mobsters for quite a while and finally makes his final payment to him. So it shows the lengths that he's willing to go for this lifestyle.
Yeah, yeah, he's especially the fact that he's going to go try kill someone he doesn't know his status in the underground world or anything, or the underworld. But it's crazy the amount of guards that guy has. That he's someone important, but it's like Cosmo doesn't really care. It's kind of like he's so focused, and you don't expect that from the way he acts. When he's around the mobsters or in the club, he seems way more like he seems laid back, but also that he's given up, kind of like a mix of both.
Yeah, I agree with you. One of the things that I think even speaks to it further is while Cosmo is in the midst of this chaotic, just intense, adrenaline filled mission, he calls the club to see what number is being played and who's on stage, just like, and it shows how intensely into this operation he is, where it really truly he lives and breathes the club.
Yeah, I just remembered that scene when you said it, and now that you mention it, that's probably the scene that most like solidifies what we've kind of been talking about his relationship to the club being, because he does like you don't think he's gonna make that phone call and ask about all that, and then he does, and you're just like, wow, he like lives there even when he's not there. Like he like has to be there.
Another kind of, I think, important part to the depiction of Cosmo the character and his I think depiction is probably the best way to put it, is that early on in the movie, he is kind of the MC of sorts, which announces the acts as they come on, and is kind of just not appreciated by the crowd whatsoever. They have no knowledge, or maybe they do know, but no appreciation for the fact that he's kind of, for lack of a better term, bankrolling this whole show and allowing it to be possible. He's painted as kind of a sorry sap for of sorts, and that plays such a big role into the way I perceived him, to the point that there is a discussion that I was kind of like using this prior knowledge to kind of inform, where he says, yeah, I served in Korea and I killed a couple of Koreans. And to this point, they never really depict Cosmo as a liar or someone who stretches the truth, maybe barring a few scenes where he stretches the truth. But anyways, I didn't believe him during that scene. And I wanted to see if you maybe even remembered that scene and if you believed him, because the way he's depicted, he doesn't seem necessarily capable. And that is like a turning point for the movie.
Yeah, I do. That's you're talking about that scene where he's on stage, talking to the crowd, right?
Well, is that near the end where he's talking to the crowd, or is that near the beginning
No,
where?
yeah, I think it's more near the beginning because he kind of goes on stage and he's just like rambling for a while.
Yes. And they
Yeah,
let him
yeah,
off the stage.
yeah. So it's to me like that was like he was going up there, and he thought it's like you think he's like known by everyone at the club before this scene. Like they all like these are all like regulars that come here and they like know Cosmo. But then when he starts talking, you realize like they they're not like cheering him on. That they just want the show, and they might not even know who he is. And yeah, that's another one that you're kind of like, yeah, this is like a sad guy. Like he's might be like drunk. He's drinking up on the stage, just kind of talking to someone. It's like that's his family or something, and he like needs someone to just talk to and not be lonely. And then so he just chooses to do that at his club, and those people don't care. They just want to see the show. It's an interesting scene.
Yeah, absolutely. And as far as story beats, or the arc of Cosmo, um, I'm not fully certain if it was maybe a rebirth of Cosmo, or if you're left to kind of look at him and say if it's a further indictment on the character of him. And I kind of wanted to get your perspective, Matt, as far as what he was able to go through to kind of protect his baby, for lack of a better term. Did you kind of see that as something that we should pity, the fact that he would be willing to go to these lengths? Or did you see it as a triumphant act where he was able to find something within himself that he maybe had as a young man when he was in the army, and that we're seeing the reinvigoration of Cosmo?
Yeah, when you put it that way, I think that's a good perspective to have on it, because that is really what happens, is that he kind of like redeems himself. But I guess just the way it's filmed and what scenes they put in there, it's like I like felt like I had to be pitying Cosmo. Just the way they portray him, and even when he ends up, he gets on top, and it's kind of like a rebirth of his younger self. It's still kind of like you don't feel like he won. even, and like, um I think that's why I didn't even remember the ending from the first time, because I wonder if I, I don't even remember if I took a lot of notice of that aspect, but it's also true, as I've seen it the second time, and as you brought up all these instances of him reliving his youth, which I think is kind of what he's going for in a way, even though he's not choosing to have to try and assassinate somebody. Um, it's kind of like he comes back, but it's not like the movie doesn't make it feel heroic.
Yeah, I think it actually kind of struck me while we were talking is that I see possibly even more similarities between this film and Uncut Gems, another Safdie's brother film.
Yeah, yeah, you could kind of say the same thing I just said about Adam Sandler's character in that movie, except it's a little different of an ending for that character, but uh, he still, he doesn't win in the end. It's like he always has to have more. Adam Sandler's character in that movie, but you pity him the entire time.
And it almost there seems to be a feeling, and I don't know if it's Cosbo needing more or if it's just like this is he's going to live and die with this club, and like I guess a lot of people would find that to be a sorry existence, but it's also one that is it's rooted in realism. And the way it's depicted in this film is maybe a bit of hyperbole just to illustrate it in in a whatever 2 hour time span. Now, would someone go on a mission to kill a Chinese bookie? I'm sure there's a very slim handful, but there are people who are just absolutely addicted to not only their jobs but their business, and that really would go through heaven and hell for their position. And there is, I think, a lot of the population would maybe pity's too strong of a word, but I'm going to say pity that kind of mindset.
Yeah. Well, it seems it looks, I guess, sad from the movie, but also, you know, it's hard to knock it when I mean that is a way to live. I feel like maybe Cassavetes himself, lives or has lived that somewhere similar to a lifestyle like that. Not about like a club, but being obsessed with something and that being your thing. And maybe he, sees it in a negative light when he's reflecting on it. But also, it's not like he's really hurting people by doing that. And if that's what he likes, then it's not really wrong for him to do that. Maybe it's more about this is how like society and people will view you if you live this kind of life.
That is a really good point. And I think possibly I came on to it too strongly. I think there is, I, maybe it's the delineation of passion and obsession is a good way to put it, because I think passion is admirable in society, whereas obsession people question.
Yeah, and also, it could also be that he's passionate about something that most people find weird to be passionate about. If he was
Mm.
super obsessed with doing something like people would consider healthy or good for you, then we wouldn't really see it in this same way, because it's kind of, I guess it's kind of depicted to be a little like you feel bad for him because the stuff he's obsessed with is kind of surface level, like it's just like showy, and there's not much depth to it. That's another thing probably.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that's where the perception can turn, because there maybe me as a viewer, but people in general can perceive it as someone who's very, very mindful and obsessed with material things. But I think, the more and more we dissect it, it's he doesn't like whenever the mob characters were grilling him about how much money the club makes, whether it was kind of a bluff to get them off of trying to vie for the club, or if it was the truth, he said, I don't know how much it makes. And that very well could have been the truth, where it was never about money for him. It was about, he wanted a place where there could be, I think he viewed it as art, honestly.
Yeah, yeah, and I forgot about him saying that, but I think that that says no. I totally remember the scene you're talking about, and I think he definitely says that because he says he puts all his money back into his business, and so it seems like that also just goes to show that that's the only thing he does, and he also doesn't really seem to think about money. He just thinks about that show. And another thing I remembered is how he's always giving people money. He's just like giving away, like he buys everyone drinks. I think at the end of that speech
Mm.
we were talking about earlier, he just does that kind of stuff all the time. Giving money to the girls. That's like so he it's like he doesn't think about money at all. Is another big aspect.
And you were mentioning this just a few minutes prior, but I think it becomes really very crystal clear that I think this is a depiction, a self depiction for Cassavetes, because of what you mentioned at the very beginning of us talking, which was Cassavetes used his acting salary essentially to fund his work. Where, I mean, this is a guy who seemingly, is one of the most passionate people in cinema. And I think it becomes more and more clear in my mind, at least, that this is probably how he kind of sees his passion for film.
Yeah, I don't think he did not like the studios, and he wanted to be able to tell a story that he wanted without any sort of people influencing how stuff has to be told. And I think that you really see that in just the way his movies, like how they end and how also all the scenes flow together, and how stuff that you would think wouldn't get into a huge production movie, just certain scenes and how a lot of them are drawn out, and the way the characters are talking, and also kind of how the sound seems like you can it sounds like it's independent with the way that the sometimes you can I noticed you could hear people's voices a lot better than others. um and just like little things like that make you realize that he's like doing this all himself, and this is probably like like to Cosmo loves his club, like Cassavetes is clearly super passionate about all aspects of filmmaking.
And I think I think it might have been maybe from the very start with Shadows in 1958, or it could have even been with his release of Faces. But I think he started Faces production company, which he was, one of the probably majority owners of, to fund his films. And I think it speaks to essentially what you were saying, is he adds a lot of scenes that make the film become intensely immersive. And production companies can create great works of art, but the unique pieces that a Cassavetes creates aren't the type of works that production companies generally greenlight, or at the very least would be tinkered with a lot. And there's just so many scenes that they are really just played so you get a greater understanding of the character. I mean, just count how many instances we talked about very particular choices that Cosmo makes. And if you have those, I think the understanding of the character becomes halved as well, or even more so. You really can't understand what they're going for. And Cassavetes' films live and die by your ability to really think about and observe and be entertained by these larger than life characters.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree with what you said. I was just thinking about different scenes, that where it's just, Cosmo like just doing something. It doesn't advance the plot at all, but you get such a greater understanding of this character just from watching them, and that kind of stuff isn't in most like giant budget productions. There's a lot of movies like that, but and the way it's told, it's kind of like most of the time you need something that or they a studio is going to want something that advances the plot, just because most people that watch movies, I think, want like care about the plot more than anything else. So so that's probably something they care about. And but it's a totally different film, um than something Cassavetes make. He definitely has his a really big trademark kind of stamp on his films. Like no one can really make them like his movies. I've seen a lot that kind of take from him, but none of them are like his films.
Yeah, exactly. And Matt, I have one kind of last question as to your thoughts on Cosmo the character. And I think it stems from the fact that he served in Korea in the 1950s. This is shot in the 70s. So as a youth, he fought in the war, saw combat, and you would have to imagine that would be integral in forming someone as an adult. Seeing combat as possibly an 18 or 20-year-old. And I wanted to kind of ask you, because the way it's depicted, it is there is a bit of it seems like Cosmo, maybe he was running from that part of his life and wanted to completely envelop himself into something that would take him out of that mindset and be something so consuming that it wouldn't bring him back to those memories. And this is a story of someone like that being pulled or dragged back into that lifestyle. And I wanted to see, does that seem within the realm of possibilities for you? Do you find any truth in that?
Yeah, it does seem like it's possible. And another thing I was thinking of on that aspect was how he might, if he saw combat that young and he was in the military, he may have been one of those people that are veterans and they come back and they're just not the same and they have trouble connecting with people, and that might be like you kind of said, like kind of his escape uh from that, because he seems to have trouble forming bonds with other people in general. Like even though he does seem to care a lot about people and love people, it's like he can't fully make that connection. He's kind of it's like he's like there's something always going on inside his head, but you don't really know, uh, what he's going through.
Here's a question for you, and I don't know if you would know this off the top of your head. Has any actor or actress won, Academy Awards like the Oscars from a film like Cassavetes? Because I wouldn't be surprised if not, not because of the quality, but just because of how those awards can go at times. But I honestly, I think it goes without saying, a lot of these performances are probably deserving of such accolades.
Yeah, I think they are too. I doubt that they won. Oh, actually, okay. I'm just looking at something right now, and it said because I wasn't sure, but I just looked it up, and it said Faces was nominated for Best Original Screenplay, Best Supporting Actor, and Best Supporting Actress for Academy Awards. So it sounds like they probably did get recognition. Um, and I'm actually surprised at that. I know I had heard of there being a John Cassavetes award. I'm not sure which show it's at, but I remember because I remember the Safdie brothers won it for this movie called Daddy Longlegs.
Oh, that's
I'm pretty sure.
awesome.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good one too.
So, Matt, I want to get any final thoughts you have on The Killing of a Chinese Bookie and your rating on this as well.
I don't really have any final thoughts because I feel like we covered it really well. But my rating for this one is I gave it a 5 out of 5 in this most recent viewing. I originally gave it like a 4.5 stars, but when I watched it the second time, I liked it way more. And I guess I love how this is like a mob noir themed movie because it's way different than Cassavetes' other films, and I think this might even be the best starting place for his movies. I mean, that's totally arguable, but uh, thinking about it, it might be the most entertaining for someone new to him.
Yeah, I know I've said this countless times before, but it rings true on this, so I'm gonna say it again. But my appreciation for this grew literally just through our conversation, which I think shows how deep and thoughtful this film is. And honestly, I think if you really want to dive deep into a film, this would be the one to start with. I gave this a 4 out of 5. I do think, honestly, if I were to rewatch it, that score would jump upwards. But I think this is probably the most violent and the most action out of the films that I've seen. So I think that's going to be a hook for a lot of people. But I think it's one that you're also going to be able to think maybe potentially the most about afterwards. So it's really rewarding in that regards. But Matt, I think the one, and you might actually see it differently, but the film that you could really spend the most hours thinking about after the fact is the next film we're going to be covering in it, and that's A Woman Under the Influence.
Hold on.
So, Matt, the kind of question that I was wanting to ask you, we were talking about Killing of a Chinese Bookie, and I think it's certainly a film that you can really think deeply about. And if there's any, I think a lot of Cassavetes films can do that, and I think one that can do it the most, or that you can spend the most time thinking about, at least from my perspective, was A Woman Under the Influence. And I wanted to ask you, was this a film that you kind of spent a lot of time pontificating about after the fact?
Definitely, probably more than any of his other movies. This is it's really you don't really understand. It's hard to understand what happens.
I agree. It's in doing so, you know, as a textbook example of a mental illness, it's it's so out of the realm of what you see in film and even so in real life. But that, of course, is how mental illness can be seen. And there's probably people who have been touched by mental illness where this would ring true in so many ways. Gina Rowland's depiction of this and the way John Cassavetes wrote the character, our main character, is one of the most unique characters in cinema. Don't you think, Matt?
Yeah, I remember the first time I watched this, I was like, this is probably my favorite acting performance of any movie, and I think I still agree. Just because how it's so the way she acts in the movie is just it's so strange. Like something's wrong, and but you can't figure out what it is. Um, it's very perplexing, and it's just so believable because of how well she pulls it off. You would think that this is something that she went through. I don't know how it seems so real that you feel like so all the scenes feel so intimate, like you're there with them. It's very it's the way it hits you is different than most other movies.
Yeah, and I honestly I think because of how personalized the behavior and the possible disease is depicted, it makes it feel just it's you're in awe of what's happening with this character and you feel for them, but you also can't quite take your eyes off of them and you can't stop thinking like what is going on here. And I've read, I think, theories that people believe it to be bipolar and that Gina Rowland's character is going through a manic episode. I my opinion as I was watching is I thought this could be potentially schizophrenia, but also, it didn't seem like so much that it was psychotic hallucinations. It was just for lack of a better term, a perversion of Gina Rowland's character's mindset. Do you have any guesstimations as to what you thought? Did you think it was mental illness, or, and I think this is something we'll dive deeper into, do you think this was maybe driven between her dynamic with Peter Falk's character?
I think it's I think it was mental illness, like just because she was, seeing and talking about things that weren't happening or already happened. Just like being like delusional. I think that the way she interacts with her husband, it plays a role obviously in this. But by the end, it seemed kind of like to me he like had been through this before, and like him like hitting her for some reason was like his strategy, like when she was doing different kind of weird things. And by the end, I noticed that because by the end I realized that's what kind of gets her to snap out of it or whatever you see by the end. But you think, okay, now she's acting all of a sudden really normal. Like what? How did this just go away? Like what's going on? It's just confusing.
Yeah, that I think is what made it the hardest to tell, is because yeah, when she snaps out of it, and obviously there's moments of clarity with mental illnesses, and then there's times when it's at its most intense, but you know generally with mental illnesses you can't snap out of it so quickly, and that was kind of what led me to think, I think that's what made me feel so on the fence as to what this is. I think it is a combination of things, but I also feel like Peter Falk and Gina Rowland's dynamic just completely exacerbated whatever was there.
Yeah, that's definitely the best way to put it, because I think there's something there, obvious, just because of, the way she acts, like yes, like doing the singing and dancing and how she interacts with the kids is a little weird, but it's not. It could just be, someone's just a little odd, but then there's the added on, like the time she thinks, stuff isn't happening, or she's seeing something that's like not there, that make me think there has to be something wrong, but they never tell you what it is, which I think is another the reason why you're guessing so much is because, at one point you think, okay, she obviously drinks a lot. Is that contributing to it, or is she just like get drunk because this happens? Or uh, and then, towards the end, I thought she was going to get medicine or something, and she ends up like cutting herself with I wasn't really even sure what happened. And then that's when I was like, okay, she, I can't really tell what's exactly wrong with her.
Yeah.
Um,
One of the, I think the things that this film does tremendously well, that I really liked about it, was you kind of start off the film with a little bit of an antagonistic relationship with Gina Rollins' character because she's painted as an adulterer. But I think at the end, you your perspective kind of flips where you feel deeply for this woman, and it's just her circumstances are terrible, and you just want her to have a better life. Essentially, I love that that Cassavetes was able to write something to where Gina Rollins could put you through the ringer as far as your connection to that character.
yeah, because I mean, the thing she does the most to me, it's like she's very handsy, and it seems like she's not hitting on guys, but I guess she's being like super like joyful. I don't know how to say it, like very strange and like too happy all the time. But then it's like Peter Falk's character, Nick, I think his name is, doesn't he like knows it's a problem, but he seems like he loves her enough, or he loved her enough, like when she's not like this, that he tries to like handle the situation, but also he explodes, like he has a temper big time. So that is something that plays a big part in, I guess, the whole dynamic. It's about the dynamic between them two almost as much as it is about, her mental illness.
Yes, because the way Nick slash Peter Falk's character is written feels very masterfully crafted, because he is depicted as someone who's hapless, I think, and in over his head, and also has that temper, which is really a bad combination of what you would want from someone who is really in a position to where he needs to be supporting someone like this. And two of the, we mentioned a lot of the times where he would physically strike her, scream at her, but there's also a couple decisions he makes, and they both are to invite numerous people over to the house, and both times they felt very inappropriate and just like not reading the situation that he's in, and just very miscalculated. Did those scenes kind of strike you as well, Matt? Because they really struck me.
Yeah, yes, definitely. It's like like I think about his whole character, like when he's like giving his kids beer. He's like he always is like inviting people over, and then he's trying to push everyone to act normal all the time. He's always like, we're here to have fun, like, stop, stop doing whatever you're doing, like we need to like be talking and having a conversation like this. So it's I guess he's very like controlling, obviously, and he also doesn't really think a lot of the times about how what he's gonna do is gonna impact others. Like what you were saying, when he invited all those people over to his house when I can't remember her name for some reason. Gina Rollins' character comes back into the house from the hospital.
Yeah, that scene. Uh, Rarely am I kind of ahead of a film, but before uh, Nick, the character of Nick's mom, is like, "You really shouldn't have done this. You need to send everyone out." I was like, dude, that is the absolute wrong decision. If someone's coming out of the psych ward after 6 months, the last thing they need is for like to be greeted by 50 people, because
Yeah.
that's just that's a stressful situation for anyone, let alone someone who's been in, basically isolated for 6 months.
And it's they kind of show that because she starts out, like she hasn't changed at all, but then by the end of the night, I think it's the same night, she's basically back to normal. And it's very gradual.
Yeah, she goes through such a, a wide array of emotions. She's nearly catatonic when she comes into the house, and then she gets kind of stirred up, and part of that is Nick's doing. He even kind of encourages old behavior, and that leads her to do things, and then he says no, like don't talk like that, don't tell jokes. And I just feel like it's such an unhealthy relationship, honestly.
Yeah, I can't see why they're together. And it's as if like the reason they like seeing why they got together would be something that the movie didn't include, and like you're not supposed to know because all the good between them is kind of hidden throughout the whole movie. It's kind of only for the most part they're on thin ice and struggling the entire film as relationship wise.
Yeah, I really, I did find it to be captivating how this movie can really illustrate the effect it has on the affected, and like how Gina Rollins has to deal with this acting, and she was even almost cognizant of how this is strange. After the fact, she's like, yeah, I know, I'm just being myself. And then Nick, just who has kind of a vision of what he wants his life to be like, but in reality his existence is so far from that. And on top of that, his mother, who you would assume just wants the best for him, and sees Gina Rollins' character as like a catalyst for chaos, for lack of a better term. And then the cherry on top is kind of how Gina Rollins' character's parents are thrown into all this, and how the father feels a need to protect his daughter, but it's they're at a station in life where, as you create your own family, you almost lose that role as like a guardian over your kids once they have kids. So all those dynamics, I thought it just made for such an interesting story.
Yeah, the whole family dynamics it's really interesting, and it's also like how they interact with their friends. Like the guy that tumbles over and breaks all his bones or something. That's Nick's friend or Nick's
Mm.
coworker, and it's kind of Nick's fault in a way. And then also like when that guy brings his kids over, and and she's acting incredibly weird. That's another scene that stuck out to me. There's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and do you think the guy falling on the work site was just to throw in a further like illustration of his life being in disarray, or just kind of how maybe also to depict that it's hard to have a handle on even your work life when your personal life is so chaotic.
Yeah, I think it's at first I was totally agreeing with the first one, but I think it could also be the second. Because to me it's like because he was like on edge and telling no one to talk about it, and that's only because his personal life is in ruins, and it seems like everyone at work is gossiping about it, and he just explodes again, and starts yelling at that guy, and that kind of leads to the accident. And so it's, you could also say it's just the way he's acting is just causing, all sorts of bad things to happen in his life. There's just so many different ways to look at it, which is the interesting part, because it's ambiguous, but it's just like thrown in there, and you're kind of like, wow, like this is really crappy for him.
Yeah, and uh, one additional scene I really want to kind of highlight is once Nick's character calls the doctor to his house. That scene is probably the most intense and memorable scene of the movie for me, and I thought all parties did a tremendous job in that scene.
Yeah, that I remember. It felt so much like what it would actually be like to try and get someone like that to go into treatment, and how the doctor would actually be acting, and how Nick would be acting. All the characters, I agree, that might be the best scene performance wise, just because it feels like it feels like it's long, and it's also like they didn't break character that whole time, which is it possibly not true, but the movie makes it feel like one long scene.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just a tremendous job by Gina Rollins. Peter Falk was amazing. It felt like you know he was up there with like a Al Pacino or Joey Pesci type of performance, with how much raw emotion and anger that he was putting out there, and Gina Rollins also had that emotion too, and just felt like I think she was sure of what was going on, but it was so misguided. It was great all around.
Yeah, yeah. I think he does actually remind me of someone Joe Pesci, a character Joe Pesci would play. Um, they're similar, and I also just want to say my favorite scene is, or my favorite part is when they're eating the spaghetti, and Nick. That's kind of like the first time you really see him blow up, and how their dynamics work. And I think that for me is my personal favorite. You also see that's the first time you get to see how out of control she starts getting around people.
Yeah, it's like she like feeds off of the energy in the room like too much, where people know kind of how to downplay it, and that is such a unique scene because I'm assuming they got a legitimate professional type of singer, because just in the middle of this spaghetti dinner, one of the workers starts singing an Italian song like brilliantly, like a great performance, and then it devolves into Gina Rollins just really awkwardly requesting people to dance with her when the singing has finished. That is just such a and it really, it's a simplistic illustration of how just awkward this would be to deal with. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and it's also like they know that she's like this. So they're like always nervously looking at Nick, like when she's, like grabbing him, and then like telling that guy he has a nice face or head or something like that. And also the fact that like they're a couple times I remember them saying like, "Oh, we're gonna have like spaghetti again," and so it's kind of implied that that's the only thing she really knows how to make, and that's like all they eat. So it's a lot of, well, like you feel the like awkwardness at the table, and when she's asking people to dance, and even a little before that when she just kind of asks people strange questions, and and then you could tell Nick is like upset, but it's like I've done this before. Like it's very it's he has so much emotion, like he says so much by the way he acts and the way the scenes are filmed that it's hard to fully like say exactly what he's thinking because it's just not so simple.
I agree. His character is definitely a complex one and hard to fully wrap your mind around. And even that decision, like that they keep going there for dinner, and like I feel like a spaghetti dinner for that many people, that might be the the simplest dish to make for like 12 people. But my mind goes to the fact that maybe Nick is thinking from the perspective of, well, I want to have people around her and hope that that normalizes her or it lifts her spirits maybe. But I don't know, my mindset is like, you know this person, obviously you've been married to them for years, you've had kids with them. Like, how hasn't it got through Nick's head that this is like not a great dynamic for her? Like, this is maybe too intense to just show up in the morning and request a huge dinner for people, you know?
Yeah, yeah, it's that was another thing I was just thinking about. It's like he always wants so many people there, and it's interesting to me that they also all agree to come. It's kind of like he's like best buddies with all of them because why would they all agree to go there all the time if this is kind of how the dinner usually turns out. You wonder like what made them so popular among all these people in the first place.
When you say that, it honestly it leads me to kind of question, do you think that was a way for Cassavetes to get across the fact that Nick is a personable character? He is nice. He has friends. Like, he's not necessarily a bad guy, despite how we see him react to some of the more aggressive and intense things he does with Gina Rollins' character.
Yeah, cuz to me that's the part that makes you not, or at least made me not like really hate Nick. Like even though he's abusive and he's the way he treats, his wife isn't good. It's like it's almost as if he doesn't want to blow up like that, but it's like he can't help himself. And in a way that makes you feel a little sorry for him. And also it does seem like he gets along great with, I mean, the fact that he could invite that many people to her returning and they all show up dressed nicely just shows you that he has some sort of influence on all of these people. Most of them being the guys he works with. They all definitely love him.
Yeah. So and that is a key to any good story, any good movie, is to not paint purely black and white, and in that gray area and the complexity of the dynamics of these characters with everyone else is like, that's what makes Cassavetes such a unique and interesting director and writer, I think.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So Matt, I want to ask you, um, among, and I think you alluded to it or said it before, but where do these films kind of rank uh, as far as your favorite Cassavetes films?
Yeah, so the Woman of the Influence is probably my favorite Cassavetes film. And then for second, it's probably Faces, and then third is probably Killing of a Chinese Bookie. And then after that, I think four would be Husbands for me.
So that's definitely one that I want to check out. Husbands, especially just because it's Cassavetes, but also since it's in the same ballpark as these films, they're damn great. And I will kind of deduce from that that you gave this one a 5 out of 5 as well. Am I correct?
Yes, Yeah, and it's in my I consider it to be in my top 25. It shifts around a little, but right, it's definitely up there, probably in my top 5 or 10 favorite films.
Yeah, this is a great film. Some of the best. Maybe would you consider? And I know this is again going to be really difficult, but would you consider this to be Gina Roland's best performance?
Yeah, and I know she has so many great ones, but this is my favorite, and this is something she's playing a character that I think you don't ever see in another movie played like this. You know, like you were saying at the beginning, like someone that's mentally ill in a movie, they almost always, at least there's more of a hint about what they have, even if they don't directly say it. It's so the way she does her character, it's like more realistic from the way you see it in real life, but at the same time, uh, it's you can't figure out what's wrong, which I guess is what makes it realistic.
Yeah, and honestly, I am infamous when it comes to forgetting obvious films when I pose a question like this. But I want to pose the question like, is this perhaps the best movie where the biggest component is mental illness? To my knowledge, it is. And if I don't believe I've seen one that is as good. I've seen Girl Interrupted. That's a very good one as well. But this one I think is definitely my favorite.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely seen another one that I'll just shout out is this movie called Images. It's a Robert Altman, and it's definitely about someone with schizophrenia. But I don't think this is by far the best movie about mental illness or
Oh,
that is a mentally ill character.
you reminded me of another very good one, very unique, more unique than even this film. Julian Donkey Boy, another depiction of
Oh,
schizophrenia.
yeah. Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, now it's tough. I totally forgot about that in this context, but I might still say I just have to prefer this a little more.
Absolutely. I my quick highlight. We've talked about it a pretty good bit. My favorite Cassavetes right now would be Opening Night, but this is a very close second. And honestly, all five that I've seen so far are really great. And you know, I would definitely recommend watching Cassavetes. Matt, any final thoughts on A Woman Under the Influence?
Uh, no, I mean, I think we covered it. We covered it pretty well. I just really, you could start here even with Cassavetes. I guess it's hard to pick one for him because I think both the movies you talked about were great, and I think they're both definitely worth watching.
Yeah, the only thing that I would consider is so, and I'm gonna say maybe when you watched it, I think you might have just been able to innately understand more of his content like quickly, like because that's the one thing I would say. It's not a negative at all, and it's kind of hard to put into words, but there it's so thoughtful that it feels difficult to fully understand all of the dynamics. And I think that would be the only piece that makes some of Cassavetes' movies like less accessible. I feel they are very accessible, but to have a full understanding of the human dynamics, honestly, is maybe the only challenging part of his movies and their motivations. Do you kind of agree with that, Matt?
Yeah, yeah, like this. I feel like if I showed this movie to most people, like they would probably be interested, but they might not like get it because I think you have to. I feel like you might have to understand a little bit of what he's going for before you just turn it on, or else you might because it's so different than pretty much all other movies that I could see why I would be left confused, but for me, the fact that the movie was so complex and I guess like deep, it had a lot of meaning to it, made me more interested in like trying to figure it out. But I think if you aren't kind of interested in Cassavetes, maybe even as a filmmaker in general, and you're just kind of watching various movies, I think this would be a strange one to just put on.
I agree, and I think the 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 flip side of it is that they're very rewarding movies for sure.
Yes, definitely.
Well, that is all for us, Matt. Thank you for joining me, man. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it too. He's one of my favorite directors, probably top three favorites.
And he's great. And if you didn't get the message yet, definitely check out Cassavetes because there's a ton of stuff to really, really appreciate. Thank you all for joining us. That's all from us, and we will catch you on the Flippity Floop. Bye, y'all.